Acknowledgement of Country and Welcome to Country ceremonies have become near ubiquitous at this stage. They're at the beginning of many meetings, they're at the beginning of sporting events, and they're at the beginning of many mundane situations. So much so, the people have become very tired of them. But it also begs the question of if your employer is doing these at the beginning of many meetings and you don't agree with it, can your employer fire you for not going along? Can your employer dock your pay? Can they take other repercussions for you not agreeing to or participating in an acknowledgement of country? This, of course, is a major issue because welcome to countries and acknowledgement of countries are so common. I was attending a Zoom class recently and the Zoom lessons had acknowledgement of countries at the beginning of them. It became a bit of a farce. However, one employee in Melbourne has stood up for himself, and in reality stood up for the rest of us who didn't really know exactly how this would play out. He stood up and he objected to the acknowledgement of country, and subsequently his employer, a council, decided to fire him. He then took this case up with the Fair Work Commission, which then found that he had been unfairly dismissed. Now this stands in a little bit of contrast to the case of Antoinette Lattouf, which I covered recently. Antoinette Lattouf was fired from ABC for her political opinions. She took the case to federal court. Now, I believe that the difference between Antoinette Lattouf and the streetsweeper who was fired for his opinion is simply the nature of the contract they were on and potentially how much they were being paid. After you're being paid over a certain amount, well, you have to take it to federal court. And on certain contracts, you might also need to take it to federal court, which is why Antoinette Lattouf needed to go through that expensive process. However, the street sweeper being employed on a normal contract, it appears he could just go to the Fair Work Commission. That's at least my understanding of the situation. Regardless, the Australian reports about the situation. A Melbourne street sweeper, sacked by one of Australia's most left-wing councils after objecting to an acknowledgement of country being made at the start of weekly toolbox meetings, has won his unfair dismissal claim. Sean Turner was dismissed by Darnaban City Council after questioning why the acknowledgement of country was being made for the first time at a meeting of the street sweeping team. He had told the meeting that if you need to be thinking any more, it's the people who have worn the uniform and fought for our country to keep us free. i.e., you need to support the soldiers and the troops rather than do an acknowledgement of country. A sentiment that I think that many people are feeling at the moment. It continues on. It's getting out of hand and people are losing it. It's now being done at the opening of a postage stamp. Mr. Turner later told council officers investigating his alleged, quote, serious misconduct. I don't need to be welcomed to my own country. So it seems the council accused him of serious misconduct in relation to objecting to the acknowledgement of country. That is a joke. It is not serious misconduct to object to anything that's necessarily being done at a workplace. But regardless, the Australian then reports, during the meeting with council managers, Mr. Turner was accompanied by a support person who was Indigenous. He told the investigators he believed the acknowledgement of country should only be for sizable occasions, including when international visitors were present. The council's chief people officer, Yvette Fuller, told Mr. Turner, quote, we have very strong expectations that an acknowledgement of country is done before all formal meetings. To which Mr. Turner replied, then why didn't we do it in this meeting? Which I think is a pretty good comeback, but anyway, the Australian then reports, in terminating Mr. Turner's employment, the council alleged that he said at the toolbox meeting that the acknowledgement was not necessary and that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, quote, do not deserve an acknowledgement at the start of meetings. It also cited derogatory remarks made by Mr. Turner about a colleague. But Fair Work Commission Deputy President Richard Clancy found Mr. Turner did not make the comments about the acknowledgement in the way alleged by the council and did not adopt a tone that was disrespectful, sarcastic, or aggressive, and it claimed, I am satisfied, however, that Mr. Turner made a comment to the effect that if anyone were to be acknowledged or thanked at a toolbox meeting, it should be the servicemen and women who had fought for this country, that is Australia. But I do not consider that expressing such an opinion that constitutes a valid reason for dismissal. He said the acknowledgement of country would have caught the members of the street sweeping team off guard, and Mr. Turner's specific question, quote, are you joking, together with his reference to the opening of a letter with the articulation of a reaction of surprise at the later meeting with the council managers. Mr. Turner pledged not to disrupt further acknowledgements, but asked to be given the courtesy to step outside during them. During the Fair Work proceedings, the council took particular offence to Mr Turner's use of the word courtesy, claiming it showed he was contemptuous of the council's commitment to its Indigenous employees and community. Mr Clancy said Ms Fuller and Elizabeth Skinner, the council's then City Works manager, were so offended by Mr Turner's conduct that they independently called his Indigenous support person after the meeting to apologise for his behaviour. But there was no evidence the support person was offended. The Fair Work Commission also stated, I reiterate, that even if the reasons for the dismissal relating to the comments about the Acknowledgement of Country and Mr Turner's colleague were regarded as valid, i.e. even if the council had a fair reason to actually fire someone, the dismissal was harsh because it was disproportionate having regard to the context within which his comments were made and Mr Turner's circumstances. Basically, you can't be fired for not liking an Acknowledgement of Country. However, it isn't quite as clear-cut as we would like, because it appears that if you object in a polite enough way, and if you are just taken by surprise by the Acknowledgement of Country being done, then it's okay. But if you actually object, that is, you actually don't like the acknowledgement being done, that is, you say something that is negative about an acknowledgement and want to get rid of the acknowledgement, then potentially you could still be fired under this ruling, it appears. That's a little bit disturbing. So for example, say an employer wanted to do Acknowledgement of Country, and you said the Acknowledgement of Country should not be done, or you object to coerced speech, or similar things along those lines. This ruling is silent about whether or not your employer could still validly dismiss you. I dare say the ruling would probably err on the side of the employee if that opinion were expressed politely. However, we don't really know, because the specific facts of this case turned on the finding that he was surprised by the Acknowledgement of Country and that he was not expressing contempt about the Acknowledgement of Country, rather expressing just an opinion in general. What we really need is a finding that you can't be forced to participate in coerced speech of this nature. After all, one would think that if you were fired for objecting to an Acknowledgement of Country, that would be a firing for your political opinion, because an Acknowledgement of Country at this stage carries inherently political overtones, and therefore you would think this would fall within Fair Work Act section 351, which I talked about in the Antoinette Lattouf video, whereby an employer cannot fire you for your political opinion. However, that line of argument seemingly didn't come up at this case. So where then does this ruling leave us? Well, it tells us that if you're going to object to an Acknowledgement of Country, you'd be well served by being polite and being considered, and by expressing a view that perhaps another group such as returned servicemen and women should be thanked at least as much at the beginning of meetings. You might also express a view that an Acknowledgement of Country might be okay in some circumstances, but not at the beginning of routine, everyday meetings. You'd be even better served by articulating a reason for this that sounded considered and sounded conciliatory, such as saying that having an Acknowledgement of Country at the beginning of routine meetings might make it less impactful at the beginning of large meetings, in which case it would appear that you would be safe under this Fair Work Commission ruling. However, if you were contemptuous or sarcastic or in some way otherwise belligerent, then it isn't quite as clear that this Fair Work Commission ruling would save you. In my opinion, it should still fall within section 351 of the Fair Work Act. However, this particular ruling was not super clear on the outcome, so you'd be in a much more risky situation if you were to be more aggressive or assertive or belligerent in objecting to an Acknowledgement of Country in a work context. Nevertheless, it appears that your employer cannot fire you for simply objecting to an Acknowledgement of Country per se, but it will turn a little bit on the facts of the scenario and how you express that acknowledgement. Nevertheless, let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. Have you been forced to partake in an acknowledgement or a welcome to country? And what are your thoughts about it? And do you think this employee should have been fired, or do you think the Fair Work Commission was right in finding that his dismissal was unfair? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.